In 1959, when the British motoring world was still humming to the tune of side-valve engines and modest family saloons, Ford of Britain unveiled a small, unassuming inline four that would quietly rewrite the rules of performance. But under its cast-iron skin, the Ford Kent engine would go on to power everything from humble Anglias to screaming Formula Ford racers. It became the blueprint for generations of engineers and racers. This is the strange and brilliant story of how one tiny engine became the beating heart of British motorsport. 1. Born from the Anglia project. The Kent engine first saw daylight in the 1959 Ford Anglia 1.6-litre, a small family car meant to bring Ford into the modern overhead valve era. Before this, most British Fords still relied on flathead side valve designs that dated back to the 1930s. Engineers at Dagenham started from a clean sheet, developing an inline four-cylinder engine with a cast-iron block, 5 main bearings, and overhead valves operated by pushrods. Its displacement was 997 cubic centimeters, delivering 39 horsepower. Modest on paper, but the real breakthrough was its design flexibility. The 1.6-litre engine was light, compact, and easy to service, qualities that would make it a favorite far beyond the Anglia's economy car mission. 2. The Kent name that stuck by accident. Ford never officially called it the Kent engine at first. The name came from the location of the engine's development. Ford's plant in Dagenham, Essex, sat on the River Thames, not far from the county of Kent. Engineers informally used Kent to distinguish it from earlier side valve units. The name stuck, spreading through workshop slang and the motorsport world until Ford eventually adopted it internally. By the mid-1960s, Kent engine was printed in manuals and parts catalogs, a nod to the region where it was born. 3. A simple design that outlived its rivals. The Kent's brilliance wasn't in radical innovation, but in restraint. It used a cast-iron block and head, a single camshaft in the block, and push rods to operate 2 valves per cylinder. The overhead valve layout gave it better breathing than the old flatheads, while the sturdy bottom end made it nearly indestructible. Mechanics loved its accessibility. Everything from the oil filter to the timing chain was easy to reach. Ford's engineers had built an engine that could survive abuse and high revs. The same architecture would remain in production in one form or another for more than 3 decades. 4. From grocery getter to Lotus power plant. In 1962, Colin Chapman of Lotus saw something special in the Kent engine. Ford supplied bare blocks and bottom ends to Lotus, who then developed a new aluminum twin-cam head. The result was the legendary Lotus Ford twin-cam engine, first used in the Lotus Elan and later in the Cortina Lotus. Although heavily modified, it retained Kent's core architecture and main bearings. The Lotus Ford twin-cam turned a humble 1-liter commuter motor into a 1,558 cubic centimeter racing powerhouse, producing 105 horsepower in road trim and over 140 horsepower in competition form. It was this collaboration that planted the Kent's DNA firmly in motorsport, a relationship that would only grow stronger in the years to come. 5. The Cortina years. By the mid-1960s, Ford had recognized the Kent's potential beyond the Anglia. The second-generation Cortina adopted enlarged versions of the same engine, with displacements from 1,198 to 1,498 cubic centimeters. These engines brought a welcome mix of smoothness and torque to family cars, but the tuning scene quickly noticed their performance ceiling. Privateers and small race shops began experimenting with cam profiles, carburetors, and cylinder headwork, often extracting over 80 horsepower from what started as a family saloon engine. The Cortina GT and the later Lotus Cortina cemented Kent's image as the everyday motor that could punch above its weight, bridging the gap between ordinary road cars and the racing circuit. 6. The 1967 revolution and the birth of Crossflow. By 1967, Ford's engineers knew the Kent design still had untapped potential. The biggest weakness of the original pre-Crossflow version was its cylinder head. Intake and exhaust ports sat on the same side, causing poor breathing and heat buildup. The solution was elegant. Move the intake and exhaust to opposite sides of the head, letting air flow cleanly across the combustion chamber, hence the name Crossflow. The redesigned head also placed the combustion chamber in the piston crown rather than the head itself, improving turbulence and efficiency. The first cars to receive this upgrade were the 1967 Escort and the revised Cortina. With better breathing came more power and smoother torque, the soundtrack of club racing for decades. 7. The Heron head experiment. Early Crossflow engines used what was known as a Heron-style head, meaning the head itself was flat, while the pistons contained the combustion chambers. This gave Ford engineers more control over compression ratios and allowed for cheaper casting. But it also produced a unique quirk. The pistons looked like tiny bowls. This design improved swirl and combustion efficiency, helping the Crossflow achieve excellent torque for its size. It was a curious blend of economy and performance engineering, one that tuners later learned to exploit, especially when fitting larger valves or higher compression pistons for racing. 8. First appeared in the Escort Mach 1. The first mass production application of the Kent Crossflow came in the 1967 Ford Escort Mach 1, replacing the outgoing Anglia 105E. The Crossflow debuted in two sizes, 1,098 cubic centimeters and 1,298 cubic centimeters, both powering different trims of the Escort range. In standard form, these engines made between 44 and 63 horsepower, but their simplicity and tunability instantly appealed to privateers and small race teams. The Escort's lightweight chassis and lively engine made it a perfect base for motorsport, from rally stages to club racing. What began as an economy engine had found its natural home in competition. 9. The 1600 Crossflow Ford quickly realized that enthusiasts and racers wanted more power from the new design. The answer came in 1968 with the introduction of the 1,599 cubic centimeter version, commonly known as the 1,600 Crossflow. This engine, fitted to the Escort GT and later the Mexico and RS1600 models, became the gold standard for Kent tuning. With twin-choke Weber carburetors and high-compression pistons, it could easily deliver 85 horsepower in street trim and over 100 horsepower with mild tuning. In racing form, properly prepared 1600 Crossflows screamed to 7,000 RPM, proving that small displacement didn't mean small performance. 10. Formula Ford's unlikely hero. In 1967, British racing promoter Jeff Clark founded Formula Ford, a new entry-level open-wheel category designed to teach young drivers without the costs of Formula 3. For an engine, the organizers chose the Ford Kent Crossflow. It was cheap, available, and reliable. Hence, it made the perfect learning tool. That decision made the Kent one of racing's most successful engines. Formula Ford became the breeding ground for legends like Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell, and Jenson Button. Every one of them cut their teeth on the Kent's raspy note. For over 2 decades, it remained the mandatory power plant for the class, unchanged in basic form. Few engines have ever had such an enduring impact on motorsport education. 11. Hand-built precision at Dagenham. During its heyday, every Kent Crossflow engine was hand-assembled at Ford's Dagenham plant in Essex. Technicians worked in small teams, each responsible for quality control at every stage. The precision involved was remarkable for a mass-produced unit. Components, such as camshaft bearings and crankshaft journals, were measured to thousandths of an inch. This level of attention gave the engine a reputation for consistency. Racers found that you could pull 2 random engines off the line, strip them down, and find nearly identical tolerances. It was the kind of manufacturing discipline that laid the groundwork for the engine's future dominance on the track. 12. Cosworth's early experiments. While the Lotus twin cam was already making waves, Keith Duckworth and Mike Costin at Cosworth saw untapped potential in the Kent block. Before the famous BDA engines arrived, Cosworth used the Crossflow as a test bed for cylinder head and camshaft design. Their work on the 1.6-liter variant directly influenced the development of the Cosworth MAE modified Anglia engine used in Formula Junior and Formula 3. The Crossflow's block was so robust that it could safely handle compression ratios and rev limits far beyond Ford's conservative tuning. This bridge between the humble Crossflow and Cosworth's future racing icons shows how deeply the Kent's architecture influenced British motorsport engineering. 13. The American connection, Cortina GT and Lotus Cortina. While the Crossflow was very much a British creation, its influence spread across the Atlantic. American racers discovered the engine through imported Ford Cortinas and Lotus models in the mid-1960s. SCCA racers in the United States began building hot versions for club events, autocross, and even open-wheel cars. The lightweight and simplicity appealed to the same kind of grassroots racers who loved the small block Chevy back home. Over time, American performance suppliers like Burton Power and Pierce Manifolds began exporting tuning parts, helping to cement the Crossflow's cult following outside Europe. 14. The rally legend is born. In 1970, the Crossflow reached its zenith in rallying. Ford's Escort Mexico and Escort RS2000 became instant legends during events like the London to Mexico World Cup Rally. The 1.6-litre Crossflow in Mexico wasn't exotic, but it was brutally effective, simple, lightweight, and able to withstand abuse that broke more complex engines. The car's combination of agility, durability, and strong torque delivery made it unbeatable on gravel and tarmac alike. Even as Lotus twin cams and BDAs ruled the top classes, the Crossflow proved reliability could beat raw power. 15. The pushrod that refused to die. By the early 1970s, most manufacturers were moving toward overhead cam designs, but Ford stuck with the pushrod Crossflow in its smaller cars. Why? Cost, simplicity, and familiarity. The Crossflow was cheap to produce, easy to repair, and perfectly suited for everyday vehicles like the Escort and Fiesta. In a world moving toward modernity, the little Kent soldiered on, defying the trend. Its longevity came from practicality. Ford had accidentally built an engine that made too much sense to replace. Even as the Pinto OHC engines took over in larger models, the Crossflow kept finding new homes, proving that a good idea rarely goes out of style. 16. The 1300 GT and 1600 GT, sleepers in plain sight. When Ford released the Escort, 1300 GT and 1600 GT in the early 1970s, few realized they were buying future classics. These models used tuned versions of the Crossflow, equipped with Weber carburetors, hotter camshafts, and free-flowing exhausts. The 1600 GT produced around 88 horsepower, but its light chassis and short gearing made it a giant killer on British B roads. Many of these engines were later stripped and rebuilt for club racing, autocross, and rallying, making them the unofficial training ground for countless young mechanics. It was a car that taught Britain how to tune an engine, and the Crossflow was the perfect canvas. 17. The Formula Ford boom of the 1970s. Through the 1970s, the Kent Crossflow was Formula Ford's beating heart, launching countless future F1 stars. The cars were light, simple, and powered by a nearly stock 1600 Crossflow, restricted by regulations to about 100 horsepower. Yet the engines were tuned to perfection, with balanced internals and handcrafted exhausts. Reliability was unmatched. These engines could run full race seasons with minimal rebuilds. Formula Ford grids around the world, from Brands Hatch to Laguna Seca, echoed with the raspy bark of Kent Crossflows. It became the soundtrack of ambition, the universal first step in a driver's career. 18. The Escort RS2000 steps in, but the Kent holds its ground. By 1973, Ford introduced the Escort RS2000 with the newer 2.0-liter Pinto OHC engine, signaling the next generation of performance Fords. Many expected the Crossflow to fade into history. Instead, it thrived in the lower tiers of motorsport and the aftermarket. The RS2000 was quicker on paper but heavier and more complex. Racers and club tuners often preferred the Kent's lighter weight and sharper throttle response. It was easier to rebuild, easier to modify, and had an entire cottage industry of parts backing it. Even as Ford's lineup modernized, the Crossflow refused to disappear from the grid. 19. The Australian and South African chapters. The Crossflow also thrived outside Europe. In Australia and South Africa, Ford assembled local versions of the Escort and Cortina, many using the Kent Crossflow well into the 1980s. Local tuners pushed the little engine far beyond its British spec. In South Africa, rally teams bored and stroked the 1600 to nearly 1700 cubic centimeters, achieving outputs close to 130 horsepower on carburetors alone. The simplicity and reliability made it ideal for rugged conditions and long-distance events. It was proof that Ford's smallest engine could conquer continents without changing its basic design. 20. From carburetors to emissions control. As emissions standards tightened in the late 1970s, Ford began adapting the Crossflow to survive in a more regulated world. In markets like the UK, the engine gained revised cam timing, leaner carburetor jets, and exhaust gas recirculation systems. The changes dulled performance slightly but kept the engine compliant. Despite these modifications, it remained easy to tune, and enthusiasts simply reverted to earlier specifications for full power. By the end of the decade, the Crossflow had proven that even an engine born in the 1950s could evolve to meet modern standards without losing its soul. 21. The Fiesta brings a new audience. In 1976, the Crossflow found a new home under the bonnet of Ford's first global supermini, the Fiesta Mk1. It was offered in several displacements from 957 cubic centimeters to 1.3 liters. Lightweight and efficient, the Crossflow made the tiny hatchback lively without sacrificing economy. For the first time, millions of younger drivers experienced Kent's eager revving character. The 1.3-liter version in particular became a favorite among learners and modifiers alike. Affordable, durable, and easy to service, the Fiesta's Kent-powered variants carried the same DNA that had already proven itself on racetracks and rally stages across the world. 22. The XR2 shows that Kent still had bite. In 1981, Ford unleashed the Fiesta XR2, and under its bonnet sat the final and most refined production version of the Kent Crossflow. Enlarged to 1,598 cubic centimeters, it produced 84 horsepower, respectable numbers for a compact hatchback of its era. The XR2 could reach 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 10 seconds, but more importantly, it delivered the same crisp throttle response and mechanical honesty that enthusiasts loved. It was the Kent's last hurrah in a mainstream production car. After more than 2 decades, the Crossflow still felt alive, eager, and distinct. A beautiful mechanical link to Ford's golden age of driver's cars. 23. The Kent gives birth to the CVH. By 1980, Ford engineers began designing a successor to the Crossflow. The result was the compound valve hemispherical, or CVH engine, introduced in the Escort Mk3. Although the CVH was a clean-sheet design, much of its inspiration came from lessons learned with the Kent Crossflow. Bore spacing, crankshaft design, and the general philosophy of compactness carried over. It represented a shift toward efficiency and emissions control, but for many enthusiasts, the CVH never matched the Kent's personality. Where the Crossflow thrived on mechanical simplicity, the CVH felt clinical. Still, the Kent's engineering fingerprints lived on inside Ford's next generation of power plants. 24. From racetrack to replica cars. Even as Ford moved on to new engines, the Crossflow found a second life in the booming kit car industry of the 1980s and 1990s. Builders of lightweight roadsters like the Caterham 7, Westfield, and Dutton turned to the Kent for its mix of simplicity, compact size, and tunability. A 1.6 Crossflow could easily power a sub-600-kilogram car to thrilling performance levels. Caterham even offered factory-tuned Crossflows in its early Super 7 models before switching to Ford's Z-Tech engines decades later. In many ways, the Kent became the beating heart of the modern kit car movement, a perfect balance of old-school feel and mechanical accessibility. 25. Burton Power and the aftermarket boom. During the 1980s, as Ford moved on to newer engines, the aftermarket stepped in to keep the Kent alive. British firms like Burton Power, Vulcan Engineering, and QED began producing performance parts that turned old Crossflows into high-revving racing monsters. Big valve heads, forged pistons, and race cams were available off the shelf. A fully built 1700 Crossflow could produce over 150 horsepower while maintaining the block's legendary reliability. These companies helped the engine achieve immortality, ensuring that even decades after its official retirement, anyone could build a Kent from scratch, stronger and faster than ever before. 26. The rise of the 1700 Crossflow. As tuners sought more displacement from the Kent, boring and stroking became common practice. The most popular upgrade was to 1,700 cubic centimeters, achieved by fitting a longer stroke crankshaft and larger pistons. This turned the engine into a torque-rich powerhouse, ideal for club racing and rallying. In this form, the Crossflow could safely rev past 7,500 RPM, delivering outputs that rivaled far more exotic engines. Its cast-iron block, originally designed for less than 40 horsepower, was now handling nearly 4 times that. It was a testament to how overbuilt Ford's little engine had been from the start. 27. The Kent's secret to strength. One reason the Kent could survive decades of racing abuse lay deep inside its block. From its very first 997 cubic centimeter version, the Kent used 5 main bearings on its crankshaft. This level of support was rare for such a small engine in the 1950s. It gave the crank exceptional rigidity, reducing vibration and extending bearing life. Most rivals of the time had only 3 mains, which limited revs and durability. Ford's choice of 5 made the engine smoother and much more reliable, allowing racers to push it beyond 8,000 RPM without catastrophic failure. It was one of those invisible engineering decisions that shaped the engine's legendary toughness. 28. The twin-choke revolution. One of the easiest ways to wake up a Crossflow was with twin-choke carburetors, most famously the Weber 3236 DGV and twin Weber DCOEs. These carburetors transformed the Kent's personality, sharpening throttle response and unlocking a rasping intake note that became iconic in motorsport. Ford's own Escort GT and Mexico used variations of this setup, but tuners went further. Twin 40 or 45 DCOEs on a properly ported head could push a 1600 Crossflow to 120 horsepower, and with a race cam, even higher. It was a mechanical symphony, simple, analog, and raw. That distinctive Weber snarl became part of Britain's racing soundtrack for 2 decades. 29. The alloy head that almost was few enthusiasts know that Ford briefly considered replacing the Crossflow's cast-iron head with an aluminum version. In the early 1970s, engineers experimented with alloy prototypes aimed at reducing weight and improving heat dissipation. Tests showed small gains in performance and efficiency, but the cost of tooling and the need for new production methods proved prohibitive. Ford scrapped the idea, but independent builders like Richardson Engineering later produced aftermarket aluminum heads, proving that the concept was sound. Had Ford gone ahead, the Crossflow might have stayed in production even longer as a lightweight, high-performance engine for the 1980s. 30. The Cosworth BDA connection. Perhaps the most famous descendant of the Kent Crossflow was the Cosworth BDA, short for belt drive, A-type. Introduced in 1969, the BDA used the same Kent block but replaced the Pushrod valve train with a twin-cam aluminum head driven by a toothed rubber belt. This innovation allowed precise cam timing and higher rev limits. In 1.6-liter form, the BDA produced over 120 horsepower in street cars and more than 200 horsepower in rally trim. It powered the legendary Escort RS2000 and became a dominant force in international rallying, its DNA still traced back to the humble Crossflow. 31. Formula Ford's Golden Age. From the late 1960s through the 1980s, the Ford-Kent Crossflow defined Formula Ford's golden era. Every championship around the world, from Britain and Europe to the Americas and Australia, ran on the same 1600 Crossflow block. Despite regulations keeping engines close to stock, builders found ways to extract precision and balance from every component. Blueprinting, balancing, and hand-porting turned ordinary parts into race-ready perfection. The result was an engine that felt alive at 7,000 RPM, yet would survive an entire season without a rebuild. Formula Ford's success ensured that the Crossflow became one of the most raced engines in history, with tens of thousands produced for competition use. 32. The rebirth of Lotus 7 with the Kent. When Caterham Cars took over production of the Lotus 7 in 1973, they needed an engine that was light, affordable, and British. The Ford Kent Crossflow was the obvious choice. Through the 1970s and 1980s, most Caterham 7s used versions of the 1.3 or 1.6-liter Crossflow, tuned from 70 to over 130 horsepower, depending on specification. The combination of the 7's featherweight chassis and the Kent's eager character created one of the purest driving experiences ever made. Even after newer engines like the Ford Z-Tech replaced it, enthusiasts continued rebuilding old Crossflows for kit cars, keeping the link to the Lotus era alive. 33. The endurance racer's secret weapon. While most people associate the Crossflow with sprints and short-circuit events, it also earned a quiet reputation in endurance racing. In the 1970s and early 1980s, British club teams used Kent-powered cars in 6-hour and 24-hour events at circuits like Snetterton and Spa. Tuned engines running on Weber carburetors and dry sump systems routinely lasted through full races without failure. Mechanics discovered that Kent's thick castings and oil flow design made it almost impossible to kill, even under sustained full-throttle punishment. The same block that once powered Anglia's to the shops was now doing 8,000 revolutions per minute for hours on end and finishing strong. 34. The export kits and rebuild era. By the late 1980s, production of new Crossflows had officially ceased, but Ford continued to sell service replacement blocks and crate engines for motorsport and export. These units were shipped globally to race series and restoration shops. The availability of fresh blocks allowed a second life for thousands of cars, from escorts to kit builds. Companies like Ford Motorsport and Burton Power offered short engines, cam kits, and complete rebuild guides. Even today, enthusiasts can still order newly cast reproduction blocks, proof that the demand for the Kent never truly vanished. 35. The engine that launched careers. For decades, the Kent Crossflow wasn't just an engine, it was an apprenticeship. Mechanics, engineers, and racers alike learned the fundamentals of combustion, tuning, and reliability through it. From balancing crankshafts to setting valve clearances, the Crossflow taught generations of enthusiasts how engines worked. In workshops across Britain, teenagers built their first motors on worn-out Crossflow blocks pulled from scrap yards. Many of those backyard mechanics went on to work for major race teams. 36. A tuner's endless canvas. Even after Ford stopped building them, the Kent Crossflow remained a favorite for tuners and restorers. Builders continued to push their limits well into the 2000s, experimenting with everything from turbocharging to fuel injection. Some swapped the old Weber setup for throttle bodies and programmable ignition systems, transforming the vintage engine into a modern performance unit without losing its mechanical soul. Its block, crank, and head design proved so adaptable that the engine became a benchmark for grassroots engineering. 37. The Crossflow in aviation. Few realize that the Kent engine didn't just stay on the road or racetrack. In the 1970s, home-built aircraft designers began using modified 1.6 Crossflows as power plants. Their simplicity, reliability, and abundance made them ideal for ultralights and small experimental planes. Firms such as Rollison and Chrysler produced conversion kits that included dual ignition systems and lightweight alloy sumps. Properly tuned, a Crossflow could deliver steady power in the air at 4,500 revolutions per minute for hours. It was another unlikely chapter in the engine's story, a car motor that learned to fly. 38. The resurrection through historic Formula Ford. By the 1990s, the Kent had faded from modern racing grids, but its spirit returned with historic Formula Ford. The series revived original chassis from the 1960s and 1970s, all powered by period-correct 1600 Crossflows. Rebuilders like Scholar Engines and Minister Racing Engines became specialists in extracting reliability and performance while keeping everything within vintage regulations. The sound of a grid full of Kent engines once again echoed across Silverstone, Brands Hatch, and Donington Park. More than nostalgia, it was proof that the Crossflow's mechanical charm hadn't aged a day. 39. the engine that outlived the cars it powered. Most of the cars that originally carried the Kent, Anglia, Cortina, early Escort, and even Fiesta names are now long gone. Yet the engines survive, rebuilt countless times, and still powering track cars, restorations, and kit builds around the world. It is common for a single Crossflow block to have served in several different cars over 50 years. That level of reusability is almost unheard of in automotive history. It turned the Kent into more than an engine. It became a shared piece of machinery that kept moving from one generation to the next. 40. A sound recognized around the world. Ask anyone who's raced or tuned a Crossflow, and they'll tell you the sound is unmistakable. The combination of short exhaust runners, the offbeat growl of a Pushrod valve train, and the crisp induction note of twin Webers creates a rasp unlike any other four-cylinder. Its mechanical honesty captured in noise, raw, eager, and alive. At a time when most engines are muted by electronics, that old Crossflow bark remains an anthem for the mechanically minded. One rev and you know exactly what era it belongs to. 41. The weird legacy that changed everything. The Ford Kent Crossflow was never meant to be great. It began as a modest engine for an economy car, built to save fuel and serve families. Yet through a blend of simplicity, strength, and sheer adaptability, it shaped the entire landscape of post-war motorsport. It powered Anglias through city streets, Escorts across deserts, and Formula Fords into history books. From Dagenham workshops to airfields and racetracks across the world, it proved that greatness doesn't always roar in cubic inches. Sometimes it hums at 1.6 liters, waiting for someone to open the throttle and discover just how far a tiny engine can go. From a humble 997 cubic centimeter Anglia to world-beating Formula Fords, the Ford Kent Crossflow proved that brilliance doesn't need size or spectacle. It outlasted empires of horsepower, teaching generations of racers that engineering genius can come from simplicity itself. More than 6 decades later, its rasp still echoes across circuits and workshops, a heartbeat from another era that refuses to fade. The Crossflow wasn't just an engine, it was an idea that greatness can start small and stay unstoppable.